My name is Olivia Bennett, and for 5 years I thought I had found my true calling at Sunshine Kids Daycare Center. At 34, I was known as the gentlest teacher in the facility, the one who could calm even the most distressed toddler with a soft voice and patient smile. What no one suspected was that my gentle demeanor had been perfected during my previous career. 8 years as an elite Special Forces operative specializing in hostage negotiation and extraction. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sunshine Kids wasn't just a daycare center. It was a vibrant world of finger paintings, storytime circles, and playground adventures that served over 70 families in the heart of Mapleton. Our little building, with its cheerful yellow walls and rainbow-painted fence, stood as a beacon of safety and nurturing in our community. Parents entrusted us with their most precious treasures, and I took that responsibility as seriously as any mission I'd ever undertaken. My journey to childcare came after leaving the military following a particularly difficult operation in Eastern Europe. I needed peace, simplicity, and a way to contribute to the world that didn't involve weapons or danger. Working with children offered that healing space. Their uncomplicated joy and resilience reminded me daily why the work I'd done mattered. They represented the innocence we fought to protect. Sunshine Kids had a special place in the community. We weren't just childcare providers. We were extended family to the parents who rushed in with forgotten lunchboxes or called anxiously about fevers. Our director, Eleanor Winters, had created a philosophy centered on emotional intelligence and creative expression that made our center different from the corporate chains popping up around town. Children need more than just supervision, Eleanor would say during parent orientations, her silver-streaked hair catching the light as she gestured enthusiastically. They need spaces where their whole selves are welcomed and nurtured. My classroom of 3- and 4-year-olds thrived under this approach. Little Maya Peterson had overcome her separation anxiety through our special morning ritual of watering the classroom plants together. Tyler Washington, initially reluctant to engage with other children, had blossomed into a natural leader during imaginative play sessions. And Emma Daniels, whose parents were going through a difficult divorce, found stability in our consistent routines and gentle guidance. My team consisted of 4 dedicated assistants. Rachel Cortez handled art activities with creative flair, turning simple materials into magical projects that delighted both children and parents. Mark Fisher, a former elementary school teacher, brought structure and educational expertise to our curriculum planning. Lisa Thompson managed parent communications with warmth and efficiency, while Danielle Murphy coordinated our nutrition program with attention to allergies and healthy eating habits. We worked in seamless harmony, each bringing different strengths to create a nurturing environment. Under my leadership, Room Sunshine, as we called our classroom, had the highest parent satisfaction ratings in the center's 15-year history. Most people assumed my gift with children came naturally. They never suspected that my calm during chaotic moments stemmed from experience in active combat zones, or that my ability to mediate toddler disputes had been honed negotiating with hostile forces. My military background remained strictly confidential, known only to Eleanor, who had hired me understanding my need for a fresh start. I had methods that my colleagues attributed to natural talent or patience. When little Noah had a meltdown over a broken crayon, I knew to create a physical boundary between him and stimulation, speaking in the same measured tones I'd used to calm panicked civilians. When the children became overly excited during holiday celebrations, I implemented breathing techniques I'd taught to special ops teams before high-stress missions. Olivia has a magical touch, parents would comment during pickup, watching their previously tantruming child happily help clean up toys. How do you stay so calm all the time? I would smile and offer some platitude about children responding to our energy, never revealing that I'd once maintained that same steady demeanor while extracting a diplomatic family from a firefight. Everything changed when Sunshine Kids was acquired by Kid First Learning Corporation, a rapidly expanding childcare conglomerate with facilities across 3 states. The news came during our weekly staff meeting, Eleanor's eyes downcast as she delivered the information. "The board of directors has accepted an offer from Kid First," she announced, her voice strained. "They've assured me that daily operations will continue as normal, with minimal disruption to our programs." The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. Kid First had a reputation for standardizing the required centers, implementing rigid curriculums, and cost-cutting measures that prioritized profit margins over creative approaches. "What about our teaching philosophy?" Lisa asked, voicing the concern foremost in everyone's mind. "I've been assured that our core values will be respected," Eleanor replied, though her expression betrayed her doubts. "They're sending a transition director next week to evaluate our programs." That transition director arrived on a Monday morning in September. Nathan Drake was 42, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed wildly impractical for a childcare environment. His closely cropped hair and rigid posture immediately triggered my situational awareness, body language I recognized from military officers more concerned with protocol than people. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. While Eleanor gave him a tour of the facility, I observed his reactions. He showed little interest in the children's artwork covering our walls, or the innovative learning stations we'd created. Instead, he made notes on a tablet, occasionally taking photos of room layouts and storage areas. When he reached my classroom during nap time, I was sitting between two cots, softly singing to Emma, who struggled with falling asleep. Drake stood in the doorway, watching with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Ms. Bennett, I presume?" he said after I'd finished the song, and Emma had drifted off. "Yes, welcome to Room Sunshine," I replied, carefully moving between the sleeping children to greet him. "Impressive how quiet you keep them," he remarked, glancing around at the peaceful scene. "They're not kept quiet," I corrected gently. "They feel safe enough to rest because we've built trust and consistent routines." Drake's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression of disapproval I was trained to notice. Kid First has standardized nap protocols that have proven quite effective across all our centers. We'll be implementing those during the transition. After the children were picked up that afternoon, Drake called a mandatory staff meeting. Standing at the front of our colorful staff room, he looked distinctly out of place among the comfortable furniture and inspirational quotes Eleanor had chosen. Kid First Learning Corporation is pleased to welcome Sunshine Kids into our family of educational centers, he began, his tone suggesting a rehearsed speech. "Our mission is to create consistent, measurable outcomes across all our facilities through standardized curriculums and operational efficiency." He clicked through a PowerPoint presentation outlining Phase 1 of the transition: new digital check-in systems, standardized daily schedules, prescribed learning activities, and centralized meal planning. The personal touches that made Sunshine Kids special were notably absent from the corporate vision. "We've found that children thrive with predictability and structure," Drake continued, ignoring the increasingly uncomfortable expressions around the room. "Our proprietary Kid First learning pathway has been proven to improve kindergarten readiness scores by 15%. Rachel raised her hand. "What about our creative expression curriculum? The children's art projects are tailored to their interests and developmental needs." Drake smiled thinly. "Kid First provides pre-planned art activities with measurable learning outcomes. All necessary materials will be shipped to the center monthly." As questions continued, the true nature of the changes became clear. Our center would essentially be stripped of its identity and rebuilt according to corporate templates. Staff hours would be reduced, adult-to-child ratios would operate at state minimums rather than our enhanced standards, and our child-led learning approach would be replaced by scripted lessons. Eleanor sat silently at the back of the room, her usual vibrant presence diminished. When I caught her eye, she gave a small shrug that communicated volumes. This was happening whether we liked it or not. After the meeting, staff gathered in Rachel's classroom, voices overlapping with concerns and frustrations. "They're going to ruin everything Eleanor built," Lisa said, tears in her eyes. "These children aren't data points for their quarterly reports." Mark shook his head grimly. "I've seen this before at my previous school. They'll start by changing the curriculum, then they'll bring in their own people who'll work for less and won't question the corporate methods." I remained quiet, assessing the situation with the strategic mindset I'd never fully abandoned. In my military career, I'd learned to identify patterns and predict outcomes based on limited information. Everything about Drake's presentation indicated a systematic dismantling of Sunshine Kids culture. Eleanor joined us, looking exhausted. "I fought the acquisition as long as I could," she admitted. "But the board was concerned about rising costs and competition from bigger centers. Kid First offered financial stability. At what cost? Danielle asked. These children deserve better than assembly line education. Eleanor nodded sadly. I've signed a 6-month contract to stay on during the transition. After that, she didn't need to finish the sentence. We all understood that her role would likely become obsolete in the new corporate structure. That night, I couldn't sleep. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of calm with its minimalist design and muted colors, felt confining as I paced the living room. The situation at Sunshine Kids had activated something I hadn't felt since my military days, a sense of territory under threat, of innocent lives affected by powers beyond their control. By morning, I had moved from emotional reaction to tactical assessment. If this were a military operation, I would start by gathering intelligence, identifying key players, and establishing clear objectives. I realized with some surprise that I was thinking about the situation as a mission, and that the specialized skills I'd worked so hard to leave behind might be exactly what was needed now. The changes began immediately and accelerated through the week. Drake installed himself in Eleanor's office, relegating her to a small desk in the corner. New posters appeared on walls, featuring cartoon children and corporate slogans about growing future leaders and measured success. On Wednesday, a tech team arrived to install security cameras in each classroom for parent peace of mind, Drake explained, though the monitoring screens were visible only in his office. By Thursday, we received the first shipment of Kid First curriculum materials, identical activity kits with step-by-step instructions that left no room for teacher creativity or child-led learning. I watched the children's reactions closely. They sensed the shift in atmosphere, responding with increased behavioral issues and anxiety. Emma started having difficulty at drop-off again, clinging to her mother and crying that she didn't want to stay. Tyler withdrew during group activities, retreating to the book corner and refusing to participate in the new structured curriculum. During our mandatory Friday training on Kid First operational procedures, Drake singled me out when I questioned the developmental appropriateness of their new assessment methods. Ms. Bennett, he said, with barely concealed irritation, perhaps your background in, what was it again, early childhood studies at community college. His tone made it clear he found my credentials lacking. Perhaps that hasn't exposed you to the data-driven approaches that modern educational research supports. I felt my teammates bristle at his condescension, but I maintained the calm demeanor that had once served me during hostile interrogations. I'm simply concerned about developmentally appropriate practice, which is well established in the field, I replied evenly. Drake dismissed my concerns and continued with his presentation, but something in his expression changed. A calculating look that suggested he'd identified me as an obstacle. His suspicion was confirmed the following Monday when he assigned a, quote, corporate mentor to observe my classroom. Heather Mills, a sharp-featured woman with a permanent smile that never reached her eyes, positioned herself in the corner of Room Sunshine with an iPad and evaluation checklist. Just pretend I'm not here, she said brightly. I'm just gathering baseline data on classroom management techniques. Throughout the day, she documented every deviation from the Kid First approved schedule and methods. When I spent extra time comforting Maya after she fell on the playground, Heather made a pointed note. When I allowed the children to extend their block play because they were deeply engaged in collaborative building, she cleared her throat and tapped her watch. At the end of the day, Drake called me into his office. Formerly Eleanor's warm, inviting space, now stripped of personal touches and rearranged with sleek, minimalist furniture. Ms. Bennett, Heather's preliminary observations indicate some resistance to implementing our approved methodologies, he said without preamble. Kid First has been very generous in retaining existing staff during acquisitions, but that generosity depends on full compliance with our programmatic approach. The threat was clear, if not explicitly stated. Comply or be replaced. I understand the need for consistency, I replied carefully, but children aren't widgets on an assembly line. They have individual needs that sometimes require flexibility. Drake's expression hardened. Sentiment is not a business model, Ms. Bennett. Kid First has developed these protocols based on extensive research and testing. If you find them incompatible with your personal philosophy, perhaps this isn't the right fit for you moving forward. As I left his office, I noticed Eleanor watching from her corner desk, concern evident in her eyes. She motioned for me to join her for lunch in the small courtyard behind the building. He's creating a paper trail, she said quietly once we were seated on a bench beneath the maple tree. I've seen his reports to corporate. He's documenting, quote, resistance to change and, quote, operational inefficiencies to justify bringing in his own team. How many of us will be left when he's done? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Eleanor sighed heavily. Kid First typically retains less than 30% of existing staff after acquisition. Those who stay are usually the ones who don't question their methods. The implications were devastating, not just for the staff who would lose their jobs, but for the children who would lose the consistent caregivers they trusted. Research clearly showed that relationship continuity was crucial for young children's development and emotional security. There must be something we can do, I said, military training automatically shifting me towards solution finding rather than despair. Eleanor shook her head. The acquisition is final. The board signed over full operational control. Drake has complete authority to implement whatever changes Kid First demands. That evening, driving home through Mapleton's quiet streets, I passed several parents from our center. Jennifer Adams was pushing Emma on a swing at the community park. Michael Washington was holding Tyler's hand as they left the local ice cream shop. These families had chosen Sunshine Kids because they valued our approach and trusted us with their children's well-being. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to access the tactical thinking I developed in my military career. This wasn't about me or even about preserving jobs. It was about protecting a vital community resource from being dismantled for corporate profit. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, considering my options. In Special Forces, we were trained to work within constraints, to find leverage points others might miss, and to build strategic alliances. Perhaps those skills could serve a different mission now. Inside my apartment, I opened the lockbox hidden in my closet, one of the few connections to my previous life I'd maintained. Among my military commendations and classified documents was a list of contacts I'd never expected to need again. People who owed me favors, who had resources and expertise in various fields. People who understood that sometimes unconventional tactics were necessary when conventional channels failed. As I looked at those names, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Sunshine Kids be destroyed without a fight. But this battle would require a different kind of strategy than direct confrontation. Drake had corporate authority on his side, but I had skills and resources he couldn't begin to imagine. The soft daycare teacher was about to draw on her Special Forces training for one more mission, Operation Sunshine. And this time, the stakes felt even higher than any battlefield I'd encountered. Because this time, I was fighting for children who depended on us, for a community that needed the heart and soul of what we built, and for a vision of education that couldn't be quantified on quarterly reports. The first phase of any operation is intelligence gathering. I needed to understand exactly what we were facing with Kid First, beyond the corporate presentation and management buzzwords. This would require research, insider information, and careful documentation of the changes being implemented. I started by creating a secure email account and reaching out to former colleagues who had transitioned into corporate security and legal fields. Without revealing specifics, I asked about resources for investigating corporate practices and potential regulatory violations. By Sunday evening, I had compiled a concerning picture of Kid First's expansion strategy. Through public records, news articles, and information from contacts in the childcare industry, I discovered a pattern. Kid First would acquire beloved community centers, implement dramatic cost-cutting measures while maintaining tuition rates, and gradually replace experienced staff with minimally qualified employees willing to work for lower wages. More troubling were the reports from parents at other acquired centers. Stories of increased safety incidents, reduced individualized attention, and declining program quality. In several locations, state licensing authorities had documented increased violations after Kid First took over, though none severe enough to threaten their operations. Armed with this background, I began the second phase, building my team. I needed allies both inside and outside Sunshine Kids who could help document issues, provide corroborating testimony, and eventually help present a compelling case against Kid First's methods. On Monday morning, I arrived at Sunshine Kids an hour early, before even Eleanor typically showed up. I needed time to implement the first phase of my counteroffensive. The center was eerily quiet without the cheerful chaos of children, the classrooms dormant in early morning shadows. I moved silently through the hallways, a skill from my past life that now served a new purpose. In Room Sunshine, I carefully installed nearly invisible wireless cameras in strategic locations, technology provided by my former teammate Mason Brooks, now running a private security firm. These weren't like Drake's obvious surveillance equipment. They were military-grade devices designed for covert intelligence gathering. If Drake was going to monitor us, we would monitor him too. Next, I placed discrete audio recording devices in the office, staff room, and my classroom. Everything would upload automatically to a secure server that only I could access. Documentation would be our strongest weapon, and I needed irrefutable evidence of what was happening under Kid First's management. As I finished, I heard the front door unlock. Quickly repositioning a bookshelf to conceal my work, I pretended to be organizing materials when Eleanor entered. "Olivia? You're here early," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Just preparing for the week," I replied casually. "The new curriculum requires more setup time." Eleanor nodded, though her eyes reflected the same weariness that had become permanent since Drake's arrival. "There's a mandatory staff meeting at 7:30. More new policies, I'm afraid." The meeting confirmed my worst fears. Drake unveiled Phase 2 of the transition, staff reductions disguised as operational efficiency improvements. Our adult-to-child ratios would be adjusted to state minimums rather than the enhanced levels we'd always maintained. Support positions would be consolidated, eliminating Danielle's dedicated nutrition role and reducing Lisa's parent communication hours. These adjustments will allow us to optimize resource allocation while maintaining service quality, Drake explained, the corporate doublespeak almost comical in its transparency. Rachel couldn't contain herself. "You mean you're cutting staff to save money while charging parents the same tuition?" Drake's smile remained fixed, but his eyes narrowed. "Ms. Cortez, I understand change can be difficult for some employees. Rest assured that Kid First's proven systems allow for excellent care with optimized staffing models." Mark caught my eye across the room, his expression grim. We both recognized the strategy. Create conditions so difficult that experienced staff would resign, allowing Kid First to replace them with less qualified, lower-paid workers who wouldn't question corporate methods. After the meeting, I implemented the next phase of my plan, recruiting allies. Starting with my classroom team, I pulled Rachel aside during outdoor play. "This isn't just about our jobs," I said quietly, watching the children on the playground. "It's about what happens to these kids if Kid First succeeds in gutting everything that makes this place special." Rachel nodded, her usual vibrant energy subdued. "What can we do?" "Drake has all the power here." "Not all of it," I replied. "I'm gathering information, building a case. But I need help documenting everything, every safety concern, every curriculum change that affects the children negatively, every parent complaint." Her eyes widened slightly. "You're going to fight this? How?" "I have resources from my past," I said carefully. "People with expertise in corporate accountability and regulatory compliance. But first, we need evidence." By lunchtime, I'd had similar conversations with Mark, Lisa, and Danielle. Each agreed to document issues in their areas and report back to me. We would need to be careful. Drake had already demonstrated his willingness to target staff who questioned his methods. The most crucial allies, however, would be the parents. They were the clients paying for services being systematically degraded, and their collective voice could carry significant weight. But approaching them required delicacy. Alarming them prematurely could backfire catastrophically. I started with Jennifer Adams, Emma's mother and a corporate attorney who had always been deeply involved in center activities. During pickup, I mentioned casually that Emma seemed to be struggling with the new structured curriculum. "She's having trouble adjusting to the reduced free play time," I explained. "The new Kid First schedule only allows for 20 minutes of unstructured play compared to our previous hour." Jennifer frowned. Nobody mentioned curriculum changes during the transition announcement. "Emma has been more reluctant to come to daycare lately. She says it's not fun anymore." "Kid First has a different philosophy about early childhood education," I replied carefully. "More focused on measurable outcomes than our previous approach. I chose Sunshine Kids specifically because of your developmental philosophy." Jennifer said, her professional assessment clearly engaged now. "Perhaps some parents should request a meeting about these changes." I nodded. "That might be helpful. Drake seems very responsive to parent input." The lie was necessary. Drake had actually reduced parent communication channels and eliminated the monthly parent advisory meetings Eleanor had established. Over the next week, I had similar conversations with key parents. Michael Washington, a city council member, Dr. Sarah Peterson, Maya's mother and a child psychologist, and Robert Daniels, a local business owner with connections throughout the community. Each conversation was casual, focused on their child's specific experiences with the changes, never directly criticizing KidFirst but planting seeds of concern. Meanwhile, my surveillance equipment was capturing valuable intelligence. In meetings with corporate headquarters, Drake spoke openly about plans to reduce legacy staff by 60% within 3 months. He discussed strategies for circumventing licensing requirements through creative scheduling and documentation. Most disturbingly, he outlined plans to reduce individualized attention for children with special needs, describing them as resource-intensive enrollments that affected profit margins. The evidence was mounting, but I needed more than just recordings. I needed documentation of actual impacts on children and safety. Unfortunately, those opportunities came all too quickly. On Wednesday morning, 3-year-old Liam Mitchell fell on the playground and split his lip when only one teacher was supervising 16 children, the new kid-first ratio, but double what we had previously maintained for that age group. The teacher, stretched too thin to watch all areas adequately, hadn't seen him climbing on equipment designed for older children. I documented the incident thoroughly, noting the staffing level, taking photos of the playground setup, and recording the parents' concerns when they arrived to take Liam to the doctor. Rachel, who had been called in from her break to help with the situation, provided a written statement about previous staffing levels that would have prevented such an incident. By Friday, we had documented 7 safety incidents, 12 curriculum issues affecting child development, and 9 parent complaints about reduced communication or program quality. My secure server was filling with time-stamped evidence of KidFirst's negative impact on our center. The breaking point came during nap time the following Monday. Drake had implemented a new sleep efficiency protocol that eliminated individual comfort routines for children who had difficulty settling. Instead of gentle back rubs, quiet singing, or the comfort objects we had always allowed, all children were expected to lie quietly on their cots after a standardized 2-minute settling period. Emma, still struggling with her parents' divorce, became increasingly distressed without her usual nap time support. Her quiet whimpers escalated to heartbreaking sobs that threatened to wake other children. When I moved to comfort her, Heather, now a permanent fixture in my classroom, cleared her throat loudly. "The protocol does not allow for individual attention during rest periods," she reminded me sharply. "Children must learn self-regulation." I looked at Emma, her small body shaking with sobs, her face red and tear-streaked as she reached for me. 8 years in Special Forces had taught me to suppress emotional responses in crisis situations, but this tested my control like few combat situations ever had. "She's 4 years old and going through family trauma," I said evenly. "She needs support." "The protocol applies to all children regardless of circumstances," Heather insisted. "Exceptions undermine the system." In that moment, looking at Emma's desperate face, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about corporate profits or teaching philosophies anymore. This was about basic human compassion, the very foundation of caring for young children. I made my decision. "Note whatever violations you want in your report," I told Heather calmly. Then I walked to Emma's cot, gathered her in my arms, and held her gently until her sobs subsided into hiccups and finally the even breathing of sleep. Heather furiously tapped notes into her tablet. I knew there would be consequences, but some lines couldn't be crossed, even for tactical advantage. My military training had taught me that mission parameters sometimes needed to be adjusted when humanity was at stake. Drake's response was swift and predictable. By pickup time, I had been summoned to his office, where he sat with Heather and a conference call connection to KidFirst's regional director. "Ms. Bennett, your deliberate violation of approved protocols is unacceptable," Drake began, his tone clipped. KidFirst Learning Corporation maintains consistent standards across all facilities to ensure quality control and operational efficiency. I remained standing, hands relaxed at my sides in parade rest, a military posture that came naturally in confrontational situations. "Mr. Drake, the protocol in question ignores basic developmental needs and attachment theory. It prioritizes administrative convenience over children's emotional well-being." Drake's jaw tightened. "Your opinion of our evidence-based practices is irrelevant. This insubordination, combined with your documented resistance to other transition elements, leaves us no choice but to place you on probationary status." He slid a document across the desk, A formal performance improvement plan with impossible metrics and vague behavioral requirements that could be interpreted to find fault with virtually anything. You have 2 weeks to demonstrate full compliance with all kid-first methodologies and protocols. Failure to meet these expectations will result in termination. I took the document without comment, knowing it was exactly the escalation I had anticipated. Drake was creating a paper trail to justify my eventual firing, but he was also providing evidence of Kid First's problematic priorities. "Is there anything you'd like to say, Ms. Bennett?" the voice from the conference phone asked. "Only that I will always prioritize the well-being of the children in my care," I replied evenly, as any child care professional should. Drake dismissed me with a wave, already discussing, quote, contingency staffing plans with the regional director. The message was clear. They were preparing for my departure. I walked back to my classroom, the performance plan a welcome addition to my growing evidence file. Drake had miscalculated, assuming I would either resign in frustration or compromise my principles to save my job. He didn't realize he was dealing with someone trained to maintain mission focus under far more threatening circumstances than workplace intimidation. That evening, I initiated the next phase of Operation Sunshine. It was time to activate my network of specialists, people whose expertise could transform our documentation into effective action. My first call was to Commander Jackson Reynolds, my former unit leader who had transitioned into corporate security consulting. Jack had taught me everything I knew about strategic thinking and had contacts throughout the business and regulatory worlds. "Olivia Bennett," he answered, his voice warm with recognition despite the years since we'd spoken. "I wondered when you'd call in that favor." I briefed him efficiently, outlining the situation at Sunshine Kids and the evidence I'd gathered. Jack listened without interruption, asking clarifying questions only when necessary, the same focused attention he'd given mission briefings in the field. "Corporate takeover of a community childcare center," he summarized when I finished. "Not exactly hostage extraction in hostile territory, but the tactical elements are similar. Entity with power exploiting those without it, regulatory barriers that can be manipulated, vulnerable population affected." "Can you help?" I asked directly. "Already thinking through angles," Jack replied. "Send me your documentation. I'll have my team analyze for regulatory violations, contractual breaches, and potential legal exposure. Kid First won't be the first corporation to discover that cutting corners has consequences." My next call was to Dr. Elaine Winters, no relation to Eleanor, a child development specialist who had worked with military families transitioning after deployment. I had consulted with her after difficult missions, and she understood both child welfare and the importance of community stability. "The protocols you're describing raise serious developmental concerns," Dr. Winters said after reviewing the materials I sent, "particularly the elimination of individualized care for emotional regulation and the reduction in play-based learning. I can prepare an impact assessment that highlights the potential long-term consequences for the children affected." By midnight, I had assembled a small but powerful team of specialists: Jack's corporate accountability experts, Dr. Winters' child development assessment team, a media relations consultant who specialized in community impact stories, and a regulatory compliance attorney who had successfully challenged corporate childcare providers in 3 states. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Shortly after midnight, I received a text from Eleanor. "Check your email. Thought these might help your project." The email contained internal Kid First documents, projected staffing models, cost-cutting targets, and most damaging, a market optimization strategy that explicitly outlined plans to maintain premium tuition rates while systematically reducing service quality through incremental resource adjustments imperceptible to average consumers. Eleanor had included a brief note. "Drake left these open on his laptop during a call. I may be old, but I know how to use a phone camera. Do what needs to be done." The quiet rebellion from our usually diplomatic director confirmed what I already knew. This fight was about something far more important than jobs or teaching philosophies. It was about standing against the exploitation of vulnerable communities for corporate profit. The next morning, I arrived at Sunshine Kids with renewed purpose. Drake's probationary status meant I was under constant scrutiny, but it also gave me access to meetings and information that would further build our case. Every directive, every staff reduction, every safety compromise was meticulously documented and transmitted to my team of experts. Meanwhile, the parent network I had carefully cultivated was beginning to mobilize. Jennifer Adams had organized an informal gathering of concerned families to discuss the changes they'd noticed since the acquisition. Michael Washington was researching the city's contractual relationship with childcare providers, looking for leverage points in licensing or zoning requirements. Dr. Sarah Peterson had begun documenting behavioral changes in children across different classrooms, creating a data set that showed increasing stress behaviors, sleep disturbances, and separation anxiety corresponding directly with KidFirst's implemented changes. Drake remained oblivious to the gathering storm, focused on his performance metrics and cost-cutting targets. In his mind, I was a problem employee soon to be eliminated, not a strategic opponent with specialized training in asymmetric warfare. The confrontation I had been carefully orchestrating came to a head sooner than expected. On Thursday afternoon, KidFirst's regional director Vanessa Powell arrived for a surprise inspection, accompanied by 2 corporate trainers who would assess staff compliance with standardized methodologies. Drake was visibly nervous, straightening his tie repeatedly as he led Powell through the center. I observed them from my classroom, noting Powell's critical assessment of our facilities and dismissive interactions with staff. When they reached Room Sunshine, I was leading a small group activity, one of the few remaining elements of our child-centered curriculum that I had managed to preserve despite the new protocols. The children were engaged in a cooperative building project, their faces animated as they negotiated block placement and structural challenges. "Ms. Bennett," Drake said, his voice tight with forced pleasantry, "Regional Director Powell would like to observe your implementation of the KidFirst learning pathway." Powell, a sleek woman in her 50s with calculating eyes, surveyed my classroom with open disapproval. "I don't see the standardized activity stations outlined in the curriculum guide." "We're currently engaged in cooperative problem-solving through architectural challenges," I explained, using KidFirst's preferred corporate terminology for basic block play. "The children are demonstrating spatial reasoning, verbal negotiation skills, and collaborative decision-making." Powell's expression remained skeptical. "The approved activity for this time block is the Literacy Foundation's worksheet series. These deviations create inconsistency across our brand experience." Brand experience. The term hung in the air, revealing everything wrong with KidFirst's approach. Children weren't developing human beings in their framework, they were consumers of an educational product, uniformly packaged regardless of individual needs. Before I could respond, Tyler's block tower collapsed, sending wooden blocks clattering across the floor. Instead of the tears or frustration that might be expected, he laughed and turned to his friends. "Let's build it stronger this time. Maya, can you help with the bottom part?" The moment of resilience, cooperation, and problem-solving unfolded naturally before Powell's eyes, a perfect illustration of what our child-centered approach developed that worksheets never could. Powell seemed unmoved. "Mr. Drake, I'd like to review Ms. Bennett's performance improvement plan. The non-compliance issues appear to be continuing." As they moved toward the door, Emma tugged at Powell's sleeve. "Are you going to make our school not fun anymore? Miss Olivia says it's important to be brave and tell grown-ups how we feel." Powell stared down at the 4-year-old, momentarily speechless. Drake quickly intervened, ushering her out with apologetic murmurs about inappropriate staff communications with children. The interaction lasted only moments, but it crystallized everything at stake. Emma's innocent question had cut through the corporate doublespeak to the heart of the matter. KidFirst was systematically destroying what made Sunshine Kids valuable to children and families. That afternoon, Drake summoned me to his office. Powell sat beside him, her expression severe. "Ms. Bennett, your continued resistance to KidFirst methodologies has become untenable," Drake began, sliding another document across the desk. "We're accelerating your performance improvement timeline. You have until tomorrow to demonstrate full compliance, or your employment will be terminated." I took the document without expression, recognizing it as the final piece of evidence we needed. Proof of retaliatory action against staff who advocated for children's welfare. "Is there anything you'd like to say?" Powell asked, her tone suggesting she expected either capitulation or resignation. I met her gaze steadily. "Only that tomorrow will be very interesting for all of us." That night, as a gentle rain tapped against my apartment windows, I launched the counter-offensive we'd been meticulously planning. Operation Sunshine moved from intelligence gathering to direct action. My living room transformed into a command center, not unlike the tactical operations rooms I'd worked from in my military career. 3 laptops displayed different elements of our strategy: legal documentation, regulatory analysis, and community outreach. I sent the complete evidence package to every member of my assembled team. Jack Reynolds and his corporate accountability specialist would work through the night analyzing kid-first practices against state childcare regulations. Dr. Winters would finalize her child development impact report, documenting how the corporate protocols violated best practices in early childhood education. Our regulatory attorney would prepare cease and desist notifications for specific safety violations. The most crucial element of our strategy hinged on Jennifer Adams, whose corporate law expertise made her the perfect person to coordinate the parent response. With her help, we had organized an emergency community meeting at the local library for 7 a.m., strategically timed to occur before parents would drop children at Sunshine Kids, but leave enough time for them to attend the Kid First parent meeting that Drake had hastily scheduled for 6:30 p.m. At 11:42 p.m., my secure phone rang Jack Reynolds, calling with preliminary findings. "Olivia, we've identified multiple actionable violations," he said, his voice carrying the focused energy I remembered from mission briefings. Kid First's staffing reductions explicitly violate state licensing requirements for special needs accommodation. Their naptime protocol contradicts mandatory emotional support guidelines. And their elimination of individualized care plans violates federal inclusivity standards. "Will it be enough to force compliance?" I asked, thinking strategically. "Better than that," Jack replied, satisfaction evident in his tone. "We've discovered Kid First is currently under investigation in 2 other states for similar violations. Your evidence could trigger a multi-state regulatory response, especially with the paper trail you've established, connecting these practices to corporate policy rather than isolated incidents." I allowed myself a small smile, the first real one in weeks. "What about the financial angle?" My team found something interesting in the acquisition documents Eleanor provided. Kid First received community development funding based on promises to maintain Sunshine Kids' existing programs and staffing levels. Their actual actions constitute grant fraud, a serious federal offense with significant penalties. This was the leverage we needed, a concrete legal violation that transcended subjective arguments about educational philosophy. Kid First hadn't just changed teaching methods, they had potentially committed fraud. "Send everything to Jennifer Adams," I instructed. "She'll know how to present it effectively to parents tomorrow." Next came Dr. Winters' call, her academic precision evident even at midnight. "The developmental impact assessment is complete," she reported. "Using the documentation from your staff and Dr. Peterson's behavioral observations, we've established clear connections between Kid First's protocols and negative outcomes for children. Most concerning," she continued, "are the emotional regulation issues emerging in multiple children. Your recordings of increased crying at drop-off, disrupted sleep patterns, and regression in social skills directly correlate with the implementation timeline of Kid First policies. This isn't just anecdotal, it's statistically significant across your student population." The final piece fell into place at 2:13 a.m. when our media consultant confirmed that 3 local news outlets had agreed to cover the community meeting. A reporter from the Mapleton Daily Record was particularly interested in the story of corporate interests potentially exploiting a beloved community institution. By dawn, I had finalized our strategy and distributed role assignments to everyone involved. This would require precise timing and coordination, skills my team had mastered in our childcare work, though never for quite this purpose. I arrived at Sunshine Kids at my usual early hour, projecting calm confidence despite running on minimal sleep. Eleanor was already there, her expression a mixture of anxiety and determination. "Everything's ready," she said quietly. "The board members have been notified. 5 of the 7 have confirmed they'll attend the community meeting." This was a crucial development. Though the board had approved the Kid First acquisition, they retained ultimate authority over the center's charter. With sufficient evidence and community pressure, they could potentially void the management contract for cause. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, briefly squeezing her hand. "For everything." She smiled sadly. "I should have fought harder from the beginning. These children deserve better than spreadsheet education." As staff arrived, I quietly confirmed that each had their role assignments for the day. Rachel would document any safety concerns with time-stamped photographs. Mark would track all deviations from state licensing requirements. Lisa would record parent comments and concerns during morning drop-off. Each piece of evidence would further strengthen our case. Drake arrived at 8:15, looking unusually harried. The regional office had clearly increased pressure following Powell's visit, and he carried a thick folder of what appeared to be new implementation directives. He barely acknowledged the staff, disappearing into his office with a curt nod. Morning drop-off proceeded normally, though I noticed several parents exchanging meaningful glances. The parent network spreading awareness of the community meeting without alerting Drake. Jennifer Adams delivered Emma with an almost imperceptible thumbs up, while Michael Washington lingered slightly longer than usual, casually mentioning, quote, library plans to another father within Drake's hearing. At 9:30, the first domino in our carefully arranged sequence fell. A licensing compliance officer arrived for an anonymous complaint follow-up, timed perfectly to coincide with snack preparation under the new Kid First nutritional protocols. These protocols had eliminated individual allergy accommodations in favor of a universal safe snack approach that Drake insisted would streamline operations. Unfortunately, the universal options failed to account for several children's specific dietary needs, creating potential safety issues that our documentation had highlighted. The compliance officer, a meticulous woman named Rita Chambers, methodically inspected food preparation areas, reviewing allergy documentation and questioning staff about modified procedures. Drake emerged from his office, visibly alarmed by the unexpected regulatory presence. "This is a routine visit," he assured the officer, his customer service smile firmly in place. Kid First Learning Corporation maintains the highest standards of compliance across all our facilities. "I'm responding to specific complaints regarding allergy management protocols," Chambers replied neutrally, making notes on her tablet. "I'll need to see your accommodations documentation for children with restricted diets." Drake's smile faltered slightly. The new streamlined protocols had eliminated individual accommodation plans in favor of standardized approaches, a deviation from licensing requirements that our documentation had carefully noted. As this interaction unfolded, I received a text from Jennifer Adams. Emergency board meeting confirmed for noon. 7 of 7 members attending. The plan was working. The licensing inspection would document specific violations, creating immediate pressure on Kid First's operations. The parent meeting would demonstrate community opposition to the changes. The board meeting would provide a governance mechanism to act on both. By 10:45, Chambers had identified enough concerns to issue a provisional citation requiring immediate corrective action for allergy management protocols. She informed Drake that a follow-up inspection would occur within 48 hours, and failure to address the violations could result in capacity restrictions or conditional licensing. Drake's composed facade cracked slightly as he accepted the citation. His corporate playbook hadn't prepared him for coordinated regulatory intervention. He retreated to his office, immediately placing calls to Kid First headquarters. The morning continued with each staff member executing their assigned tasks flawlessly. When Drake emerged to observe classrooms, he found only perfect compliance with official protocols. We needed no additional confrontations that might distract from the larger strategy. At 11:30, I received another text, this one from Jack Reynolds. State Regulatory Board received our complete documentation package. Formal investigation opened into Kid First compliance across all state facilities. The noose was tightening. What Drake had failed to recognize was that my military background hadn't just taught me discipline and child management techniques. It had trained me in strategic thinking, asymmetric response to power imbalances, and the coordination of complex operations with multiple moving parts. At precisely noon, Eleanor received a call from the board chairperson requesting her immediate presence at the emergency meeting. She departed casually, mentioning a lunch errand to avoid raising Drake's suspicions. By 1:15, my phone vibrated with an update from the community meeting. Jennifer Adams reported that over 60 parents had attended, along with 3 board members, 2 local reporters, and representatives from the mayor's office. Dr. Winters had presented her developmental impact assessment, while Jennifer had outlined the potential legal and regulatory violations documented in our evidence package. The community response had been overwhelming. Parents sharing stories of their children's changed behavior, local business owners expressing concern about corporate entities undermining community institutions, and early childhood professionals from other centers validating our concerns about Kid First's methods. Most importantly, the board members in attendance had witnessed the community's unified opposition to the changes at Sunshine Kids. They had promised to bring these concerns to the emergency board meeting and reconsider the management contract with Kid First. At 2:30, while the children were napping, Drake received a call that visibly shook him. Though I couldn't hear the conversation, his expression shifted from confusion to alarm to anger in rapid succession. He slammed down the phone and immediately began gathering documents from his desk, shoving them haphazardly into his briefcase. The next development came from an unexpected direction. 3 Kid First corporate representatives arrived unannounced, brushing past Drake and requesting an immediate meeting with all senior staff. Drake's expression as he escorted them to the conference room suggested he was no longer directing events but responding to them. Exactly the position shift our strategy had intended. At 3:15, Eleanor returned from the board meeting, her expression carefully neutral as she passed Drake's office. When she reached my classroom, however, she allowed a small smile to emerge. "The board has voted to invoke the quality maintenance clause in the management contract," she whispered. "Kid First has 48 hours to restore original programming and staffing levels or face contract termination for cause." This was even better than we had hoped. Rather than a protracted legal battle, the board had found a contractual mechanism to force immediate compliance. Kid First would either have to abandon their cost-cutting strategies or lose the center entirely. At 4 o'clock, as parents began arriving for pickup, the corporate representatives emerged from their meeting with Drake. Their expressions were grim as they exited the building without acknowledging staff or families. Drake remained in the conference room, door closed, blinds drawn. Jennifer Adams arrived early to collect Emma, casually stopping by my classroom to update me. "The regulatory board has issued a system-wide compliance review for all Kid First facilities in the state," she murmured, while Emma gathered her artwork. "Their stock dropped 12% when the news broke an hour ago." Corporate consequences, the language Kid First leadership would understand most clearly. Their aggressive acquisition strategy depended on investor confidence and regulatory clearance. Our coordinated action had threatened both simultaneously. By 5:30, all children had been picked up, and an unusual tension filled the center. Staff gathered in Rachel's classroom, speaking in hushed tones about the day's events and speculating about what would happen next. Drake remained isolated in the conference room, periodic raised voices suggesting difficult conversations with corporate headquarters. At 5:45, Eleanor called all staff to the main playroom. Her expression was more peaceful than I'd seen since the acquisition began. "I've been authorized by the board to share some information with you," she began, her voice steady. "Following today's emergency meeting, the board has invoked contractual provisions requiring Kid First to restore our original programming and staffing levels within 48 hours. A ripple of astonished relief moved through the staff. Eleanor continued. "Additionally, the board has requested a comprehensive review of the acquisition agreement with an eye toward potential termination if Kid First cannot demonstrate good faith compliance with the original terms." She paused, making eye contact with each staff member. "I want to thank each of you for your dedication to our children and families during this difficult transition. Your professionalism and commitment to our core values have not gone unnoticed." As the impromptu meeting concluded, Drake finally emerged from the conference room. His usual composed demeanor had vanished, replaced by barely controlled fury as he approached our group. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his voice tight. "A word, please." I followed him to his office, maintaining the calm exterior that had served me through far more threatening confrontations. As he closed the door, he turned to me with naked hostility. "This coordinated attack on Kid First operations has your fingerprints all over it," he said, abandoning any pretense of professional courtesy. "I don't know how a daycare teacher orchestrated regulatory inspections and board interventions, but corporate security is investigating every aspect of today's events." I remained standing, hands relaxed at my sides in my habitual parade rest position. "I'm simply an early childhood educator concerned about best practices for the children in my care, Mr. Drake." "No," he said, studying me with narrowed eyes. "You're something else entirely. Nobody moves with this kind of precision without training. Nobody coordinates multiple pressure points simultaneously without experience. Who are you really, Miss Bennett?" For a moment, I considered maintaining my cover completely. But strategic advantage sometimes comes from selective revelation. Another lesson from my military career. Someone who understands that true security isn't created through intimidation and control, I replied evenly. It comes from building relationships, establishing trust, and creating environments where everyone feels valued and protected. Perhaps if Kid First understood that principle, today's events wouldn't have been necessary. Something in my posture or tone must have triggered recognition in Drake. He stepped back slightly, reassessing me with new awareness. "Military?" he asked abruptly. I offered the smallest of smiles. "I've had various experiences that taught me the importance of protecting vulnerable communities, Mr. Drake. Today was simply an application of those principles." Before he could respond, his phone rang, the distinctive ringtone he used for corporate headquarters. He glanced at it, then back at me with undisguised resentment. "This isn't over," he said, reaching for the phone. "Actually, it is," I replied with quiet confidence. Kid First has two choices now: restore our programs and staffing to original levels, or face contract termination, regulatory penalties, and potential legal action. Either way, Sunshine Kids will continue serving children according to developmental best practices. I left him to his call, closing the door quietly behind me. In the hallway, Eleanor waited with an expression of mingled admiration and curiosity. "I've known there was more to your background than community college courses," she said as we walked toward the staff room. "Military?" "Special Forces," I confirmed, seeing no reason to maintain the cover with her now. 8 years, specialized in protection operations and strategic response. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "That explains your exceptional calm during emergencies, and your ability to coordinate today's rather impressive counteroffensive." "I had exceptional help," I reminded her. "Every staff member played a crucial role. The parents mobilized perfectly. You provided key documentation. This was a community victory, not an individual operation." "Still," Eleanor said, "we wouldn't have known how to fight effectively without your leadership." She paused at the staff room door. "The board has asked me to resume full directorship effective immediately. They've also requested that I evaluate our staffing structure and program quality." "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "My first recommendation will be promoting you to assistant director with a focus on program development and staff training," Eleanor continued, "assuming you're interested in the position." The offer caught me by surprise. I'd been focused entirely on the immediate objective, protecting Sunshine Kids from corporate destruction, not on my personal advancement. "I'm not an administrator by training," I began. Eleanor laughed softly. "Olivia, you just coordinated a multi-level strategic operation that brought a corporate giant to its knees in less than 24 hours. I think you can handle scheduling and curriculum development." As we joined the rest of the staff, who were celebrating with impromptu snacks and relieved conversation, I considered Eleanor's offer. My military career had taught me to execute missions and move on, never becoming too attached to any location or role. But Sunshine Kids had become more than just a cover or a job. It had become a community where my unique skills could protect something truly valuable. The children we served deserved educational spaces built on developmental science and genuine care, not corporate efficiency metrics. The families deserved transparent communication and collaborative relationships with their children's caregivers. The staff deserved professional respect and support for their specialized knowledge. Fighting for these principles had awakened something I'd missed since leaving military service: the sense of purpose that comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. But this mission had offered something my military operations never could: the opportunity to build something positive rather than simply preventing harm. "I'd be honored to accept the position," I told Eleanor. As staff departed that evening, the atmosphere had transformed from the tense resignation of recent weeks to cautious optimism. We had faced a formidable opponent with vastly superior resources and formal authority, yet prevailed through strategic thinking, community mobilization, and unwavering commitment to our core principles. Driving home through Mapleton's quiet streets, I passed the community library where parents had gathered that morning to fight for their children's educational experience. I passed the park where our students played on weekends, developing the social skills and physical confidence our program nurtured. I passed homes where families were discussing the day's events, perhaps explaining to children that sometimes adults needed to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. In my military career, victory had often been measured in damage prevented or hostages rescued, necessary work, but fundamentally reactive. Today's victory felt different. We hadn't just prevented harm, we had affirmed positive values and strengthened community bonds in the process. Reaching my apartment, I checked my secure phone for updates. Jack Reynolds had texted, "Kid first, stock down 18% at closing." 3 major investors demanding management changes and operational review. Your mission created ripple effects beyond Mapleton. Dr. Winters had sent a more personal message. Remembering our conversations after your last deployment about finding meaningful civilian work, I believe you found exactly where your skills are needed most. Those children are fortunate to have someone who understands that their security, emotional, developmental, physical, matters profoundly. As I prepared for bed, my military training automatically asserted itself, mentally reviewing the day's operations, analyzing what had worked effectively and what could have been improved, planning contingencies for potential counterattacks. Kid First might comply temporarily while planning longer-term strategies to reassert control. Drake might be replaced with someone more subtle but equally committed to cost-cutting measures. But tonight, those concerns could wait. Today, a community had discovered its power to resist corporate exploitation. Parents had affirmed the value of developmentally appropriate education over standardized efficiency. Children would return tomorrow to find their trusted teachers empowered rather than constrained, their individual needs respected rather than standardized away. In the quiet darkness of my bedroom, I allowed myself a moment of professional satisfaction. The mission parameters had been challenging, confronting a powerful adversary with limited resources, while protecting vulnerable civilians and preserving critical community infrastructure. Yet we had succeeded through careful intelligence gathering, strategic alliance building, and precisely coordinated action. My former commander would have approved of the operation's execution. Minimal direct confrontation, maximum leverage of existing regulatory and governance systems, and careful framing of the conflict to mobilize community support. As sleep approached, I reflected on the strange path that had led a Special Forces operative to find her most meaningful mission in a children's daycare center. Perhaps it wasn't so strange after all. Both roles centered on the same core purpose: protecting vulnerable people from those who would exploit or harm them. The difference was that at Sunshine Kids, I could build something positive rather than simply preventing disaster. I could help create the kind of nurturing environment that allows children to develop their full potential, confident, resilient, compassionate human beings who might grow up to build a world where fewer Special Forces missions were necessary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: implementing the board's directives, rebuilding programs damaged by Kid First's interventions, supporting children whose routines had been disrupted. But those challenges would be faced by a united community with renewed commitment to its core values. The soft daycare teacher with the Special Forces background had found her perfect mission after all. Not despite her seemingly contradictory experiences, but because of them. The gentle voice that calmed frightened children and the strategic mind that had coordinated today's operation weren't separate aspects of my identity. They were complementary tools in service of the same fundamental purpose: protecting the vulnerable, building security through relationship rather than force, creating spaces where people could flourish rather than simply survive. As I drifted toward sleep, I smiled at the thought of Drake's bewildered expression when he finally realized who he had been dealing with. The soft daycare teacher had indeed been the perfect cover, not to hide my military background, but to express its deepest purpose in a new context. The morning after our victory over Kid First began differently than any day since the corporate takeover. I arrived at Sunshine Kids to find Eleanor already in her reclaimed office, the space transformed overnight. Drake's minimalist corporate decor had vanished, replaced by Eleanor's familiar collection of children's artwork, family photos, and the hand-painted sign that had hung there for years. Every child deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. The board worked late into the night, Eleanor explained as I joined her with coffee. Kid First has officially accepted the restoration mandate. They're sending a transition team today. Not to implement their protocols, but to facilitate our return to original programming. She slid a document across her desk, the official board resolution with signatures from all 7 members. The legal language was precise and uncompromising. Kid First would restore full staffing levels, reinstate all community programs, and return complete operational control to Eleanor with board oversight. "What about Drake?" I asked, scanning the resolution for details. "Reassigned effective immediately." The corporate representatives will handle day-to-day operations until they can name a replacement, one who must be approved by our board. Eleanor's smile contained a hint of the steel that had allowed her to build Sunshine Kids from a small, home-based program into a community institution. The board was particularly impressed by the parent petition Jennifer organized. Over 200 signatures gathered in less than 12 hours. The center hummed with renewed energy as staff arrived. News of the victory had spread through text messages and phone calls overnight, and everyone arrived early, eager to restore classrooms to their former child-centered arrangements. Rachel immediately began recreating the art space that had been dismantled for Kid First's standardized activity stations. Mark wheeled in the reading nook furniture that had been placed in storage to accommodate uniform learning centers. "I never thought I'd be so excited to rearrange furniture," Lisa laughed as she helped Danielle restore the parent communications center near the entrance. "But it feels like reclaiming sacred ground." The transformation extended beyond physical spaces. Staff moved with newfound confidence, the hunched shoulders and whispered conversations of recent weeks replaced by animated discussions about restoring favorite activities and reconnecting with children whose needs had been standardized away. Parents began arriving for drop-off, many lingering longer than usual to witness the changes and express their support. Jennifer Adams delivered Emma with a triumphant smile, carrying a box of freshly baked muffins for the staff. "The neighborhood group chat hasn't stopped buzzing since yesterday," she told me, as Emma skipped happily to the reinstated morning choice activities. "Parents are calling it the Sunshine Revolution." "You've become something of a local hero, Olivia." I shook my head, uncomfortable with individual recognition for what had truly been a community effort. Everyone played a crucial role. The parents' willingness to mobilize made all the difference. Jennifer studied me with the perceptive gaze that made her a formidable attorney. "Eleanor mentioned your background. Special forces," she said, though she was light on details. I tensed slightly, unsure how this information would be received. My military service wasn't something I discussed with parents, concerned it might create misconceptions about my approach to childcare. Jennifer continued thoughtfully. "My brother served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He always said the best operators weren't the ones who loved combat. They were the ones who understood that protection was the true mission." She smiled warmly. "Watching you with these children, that makes perfect sense to me now." The Kid First transition team arrived at 9:33, corporate representatives in business attire who looked distinctly uncomfortable amid the cheerful chaos of a preschool in full, liberated operation. Eleanor met them in the lobby, professional and courteous, but unmistakably in command of her domain. I observed the interaction from Room Sunshine, where my students were enthusiastically rediscovering the creative materials and open-ended activities that had been restricted under Kid First protocols. Tyler and Maya had constructed an elaborate veterinary hospital for stuffed animals, complete with bandages fashioned from art supplies and medicine, made from colored water in eyedroppers. Emma was painting at the easel, her face serene with concentration as she created bold swirls of color, emotional expression that had been impossible with the prescribed coloring sheets of recent weeks. The corporate team conducted their business efficiently, clearly eager to minimize their time in the center. Their body language and careful neutrality suggested headquarters had issued clear directives: comply with the board's requirements, facilitate a smooth transition, and avoid further conflict that might generate additional negative publicity. By lunchtime, the representatives had departed, leaving behind signed agreements and implementation schedules for the staffing restorations. Danielle's nutrition position would be reinstated immediately. Lisa would return to full-time parent communication. Additional classroom assistants would be restored within the week, returning us to our enhanced student-teacher ratios. Most significantly, we received written confirmation that all Kid First standardized protocols were suspended, with full programmatic authority returned to Eleanor and her educational leadership team, which now officially included me as Assistant Director for Program Development. As children settled for nap time, once again with individual comfort routines honored and supported, Eleanor called me to her office, where Jack Reynolds waited, his military bearing softened by a casual button-down shirt and friendly smile. "Thought I'd deliver this update in person," he explained, setting a folder on Eleanor's desk. "Kid First is in full damage control mode. Their legal team is processing settlement agreements with 3 other centers that filed similar complaints after your situation made the news." Jack's expression was one I recognized from successful missions: professional satisfaction without unnecessary celebration. More importantly, their board of directors has launched an internal investigation into operational practices. 2 senior executives have been placed on administrative leave pending review of acquisition implementation strategies. System-wide impact, Eleanor remarked, impressed. From actions in one small center. Strategic leverage properly applied, Jack corrected. Olivia always understood that precise pressure at key points could affect entire systems. That's why she was one of our most effective operatives. Eleanor turned to me with new curiosity. I think there's more to your story than you've shared, Olivia. I hesitated, then decided that trust had been earned. My Special Forces role was specialized. I worked primarily with children in conflict zones, developing techniques to help them process trauma and establish safety. Our unit pioneered approaches for stabilizing communities affected by violence, with particular focus on rebuilding educational and social support systems. Jack nodded confirmation. Bennett's team developed protocols now used throughout humanitarian operations globally. Their work on childhood resilience in crisis environments has saved countless lives. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. So your exceptional skill with children isn't despite your military background. It's because of it. The most effective protection isn't about force, I explained. It's about creating environments where vulnerability is recognized and supported. Whether that's in a war zone or a preschool classroom, the fundamental principles are the same. Our conversation was interrupted by Rachel appearing at the door, excitement evident in her expression. You need to see this, she said, gesturing toward the main entrance. Following her, we discovered a steady stream of parents arriving hours before normal pickup time, carrying food, flowers, and handmade thank you signs. Michael Washington stood at the center, organizing what appeared to be an impromptu celebration. Word got out that Kid First officially backed down, he explained as we approached. The community wanted to thank everyone who fought to preserve what makes Sunshine Kids special. The spontaneous gathering transformed our day. Parents spread picnic blankets in the playground, sharing food and stories while children played with newfound freedom. Several local business owners arrived, expressing solidarity and offering support for future community initiatives. Even 2 board members attended, visibly moved by the outpouring of appreciation. Dr. Sarah Peterson found me near the sandbox, where I was helping several children create an elaborate castle system. I've been observing the children today, she said quietly. The difference is remarkable. The tension indicators I'd been documenting, restricted movement, reduced eye contact, limited creative language, have already decreased significantly. Children are incredibly resilient when provided with appropriate support, I replied, watching Emma carefully construct a moat system with focused concentration, the same child who had been unable to settle for nap time under Kid First's rigid protocols. It's not just the children, Sarah continued thoughtfully. The parents are different too. There's a sense of empowerment, of having successfully protected something valuable. Many have told me they've never participated in community action before. This observation resonated deeply with my experiences in rebuilding communities after conflict. The most sustainable recovery came not from external resources, but from helping people discover their collective power to create change. Sunshine Kids had become more than a child care center through this struggle. It had become a focal point for community identity and shared values. As the impromptu celebration continued, I found a quiet moment to call Commander Reynolds, who had departed after delivering his update. There's something I need to ask you, I said when he answered. The research our unit was conducting on childhood resilience and community rebuilding, was it ever implemented domestically? Limited applications, Jack replied. Mostly in disaster recovery zones. Why? I'm seeing potential here that goes beyond restoring a single childcare center, I explained, watching parents and children engaged in spontaneous collaborative play across the playground. The mobilization strategies we developed for communities recovering from conflict could be adapted for strengthening community education systems here. Jack was silent for a moment, the thoughtful pause I recognized from mission planning sessions. You're thinking bigger than Sunshine Kids now. The same vulnerabilities exist, I continued, ideas crystallizing as I spoke. Corporate standardization threatens educational quality. Resource disparities create intervention gaps for children who need support. Communities have latent power they don't recognize until crisis forces action. Sounds like you're identifying your next mission, Bennett, Jack said, approval evident in his tone. The afternoon transitioned seamlessly into an evening parent forum, the first since Kid First had eliminated Eleanor's monthly community conversations. Parents filled the multipurpose room, children playing contentedly in the adjacent classroom under staff supervision. Eleanor opened the discussion by outlining the official restoration agreement, then surprised me by introducing me as the new assistant director for program development. The spontaneous applause was both gratifying and uncomfortable. I had never sought recognition during my military service and found it equally unnecessary now. When the room quieted, I stepped forward, determined to redirect focus to the collective achievement and future possibilities. What happened here wasn't about individual heroics, I began. It was about a community recognizing its power to protect something valuable. Each person contributed essential elements: parents mobilizing networks, staff documenting concerns, board members exercising governance authority, children themselves demonstrating the importance of developmentally appropriate care through their responses. I paused, gathering thoughts that had been forming since my conversation with Jack. This experience has revealed something important. Education isn't just a service provided to families. It's a community system that requires collaborative protection and development. For the next hour, the forum evolved into a vibrant discussion about educational priorities and community involvement. Parents who had never spoken at previous meetings shared perspectives on what they valued about Sunshine Kids. Local educators who had children enrolled offered insights about building connections between our center and broader educational systems. Jennifer Adams, ever the strategic thinker, proposed creating a permanent parent advisory committee with representation on the board, ensuring community voice in all future decisions about the center's direction. Michael Washington suggested developing partnerships with city government to strengthen support for early childhood programs throughout Mapleton. As the evening concluded, Eleanor announced the immediate reinstatement of all community programs. Senior Saturdays would resume that weekend, parent education nights would return monthly, and our intergenerational reading program with the senior center would restart immediately. These programs aren't extras, she emphasized. They're essential expressions of our core belief that education happens within community, not isolated from it. After the families departed and staff completed closing procedures, I remained behind with Eleanor to finalize plans for the next day's full program restoration. The center felt different in the evening, quiet, peaceful but vibrant with renewed purpose. I never asked why you chose early childhood education after leaving the military, Eleanor said as we reviewed staffing schedules. Most veterans with your background move into security consulting or government contracting. I considered her question thoughtfully. During my final deployment, we were working with a village that had experienced significant trauma. The adults were struggling, grief, displacement, uncertainty about the future. But the children showed remarkable resilience when provided with stable routines and supportive relationships. The memory remained vivid. A school created from tarps and salvaged materials. Children engaged in play despite unimaginable losses. The gradual return of laughter and creativity as they experienced consistent care from adults who prioritized their developmental needs. I realized then that early childhood environments are where society's most important work happens, I continued. The security I helped create through military operations was necessary but insufficient. True security comes from building communities where children develop the emotional resources and social connections that prevent conflict in the first place. Eleanor nodded understanding. And yet you kept your background hidden all these years. I wanted to be evaluated on my current work, not previous identities, I explained. And frankly, there are misconceptions about military training that might have created barriers with families. People assume special forces means aggressive approaches, when much of our work focused on building trust and establishing safety through relationship. Well, your secret is out now, Eleanor said with a smile. Though from today's response, it seems parents are more impressed than concerned. She was right. Rather than creating distance, the revelation of my background had deepened connections with many families. Several parents with military ties had approached me during the celebration, expressing appreciation for my service both past and present. Others seemed to find reassurance in knowing their children were under the protection of someone with specialized training in creating security. The following morning brought the first test of Kid First compliance with the restoration agreement. The promised additional staff arrived, 3 new assistants to restore our enhanced ratios, along with the return of 2 part-time specialists who had been eliminated in the initial cuts. More significantly, Kid First's regional replacement for Drake appeared, a thoughtful woman named Caroline West who introduced herself with refreshing directness. "I've been instructed to facilitate your return to independent operations while maintaining the Kid First management contract in name only," she explained during her brief meeting with Eleanor and me. "Corporate has made it very clear that Sunshine Kids is to operate according to its established philosophy without interference." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a shift from the previous implementation approach." Caroline smiled wryly. "Let's just say your center's resistance created significant corporate reflection. The quarterly numbers don't look nearly as attractive when balanced against regulatory investigations, parent protests, and media scrutiny." She handed us a folder containing official documentation of the new arrangement. "My role is essentially to observe and report back that everything is proceeding smoothly. I'll be on site 2 days weekly, but operational decisions remain entirely with your leadership team." After she departed, Eleanor reviewed the documents with evident satisfaction. "They've capitulated completely. The financial arrangement remains in place. They continue receiving their management fee, but we retain full programmatic control. A face-saving compromise," I observed. "They avoid the public embarrassment of contract termination while we regain everything essential. And gain something more valuable," Eleanor added. "A proven model for community resistance that other centers can follow. I've already received calls from directors at 3 other Kid First acquired facilities asking for guidance. This unexpected development opened possibilities I hadn't considered. If Sunshine Kids could become a template for preserving educational quality against corporate standardization, our impact could extend far beyond Mapleton." The day unfolded with joyful rediscovery as children returned to the environment they had known before, one built around their developmental needs rather than administrative efficiency. The classroom atmosphere transformed as teachers reclaimed their professional expertise, adapting activities to individual interests and learning styles. In Room Sunshine, we restored our morning community circle, each child sharing something important from their lives, a ritual of belonging that had been eliminated by Kid First's standardized schedule. Tyler, usually reserved, enthusiastically described his family's weekend plans. Maya showed a shell she had found at the park. Emma, most tellingly, announced, "I'm not scared to come to school anymore because we can play how we want again." Throughout the day, I observed similar transformations across the center. Children who had become withdrawn during Kid First's regime gradually re-engaged with materials and peers. Teachers who had been constrained by scripted lessons rediscovered their creativity and responsiveness. The hallways rang with the authentic sounds of childhood, not the uniform quiet of corporate efficiency, but the productive hum of genuine engagement. At pickup time, parents lingered to witness the changes, many expressing emotional relief at seeing their children return to the joyful learning they had originally chosen Sunshine Kids to provide. "It's like the clouds parted," Jennifer Adams remarked as Emma proudly showed her an elaborate painting. She talked about school all evening yesterday, first time in weeks she's been excited to attend. As the week progressed, the center's resurrection continued. Danielle reinstated individualized nutrition plans for children with special dietary needs. Lisa revitalized parent communication systems with daily updates and photographs. The physical environment blossomed as Rachel coordinated the return of child-created decorations and personalized spaces. By Friday, when Eleanor convened our first full staff meeting since regaining control, the transformation was complete. Sunshine Kids had not merely returned to its previous state. It had emerged stronger, with renewed purpose and deeper community connections. "Before we discuss next week's plans," Eleanor began, "I want to acknowledge what we've accomplished together. When faced with a powerful system that threatened our core values, we didn't surrender or compromise. We found a way to protect what matters most, the children's right to developmentally appropriate education within a caring community." She turned to me with a smile. "I've asked Olivia to share some thoughts about moving forward, given her unique perspective on community resilience. Standing before my colleagues, people who had trusted my leadership without fully understanding my background, I felt a deep sense of purpose and belonging that had eluded me since leaving military service. "What happened here isn't just about restoring a child care center," I began. "It's about recognizing that education is worth fighting for. Not through confrontation alone, but through strategic thinking, community mobilization, and unwavering commitment to core values." I shared the vision that had been forming throughout the week, how Sunshine Kids could become a model for community-centered education that resisted standardization and corporate efficiency metrics. How our experience could guide other centers facing similar challenges. How the parent involvement awakened through this struggle could transform educational advocacy throughout Mapleton. In my previous career, I learned that true security comes not from force, but from building resilient communities, where people recognize their collective power, I concluded. What we've created here goes beyond childcare. It's a template for how communities can protect what they value most. The discussion that followed was electric with possibility. Staff who had never seen themselves as advocates embraced new roles in community education. Ideas emerged for documenting our journey to share with other centers. Plans formed for expanding parent education and deepening community partnerships. As the meeting concluded, Eleanor announced a celebration for the following weekend, not just for Sunshine Kids families, but for the entire community that had supported our resistance. We'll call it the Sunshine Festival, she declared. A celebration of children, education, and community power. The festival materialized as a vibrant affirmation of everything we had fought to preserve. The center's playground and adjacent community park filled with families. Local businesses set up booths offering activities and refreshments, and children moved freely between play spaces designed to showcase developmentally appropriate practices. A quiet moment found me observing from the sidelines as Eleanor led a community circle with children and parents together, the kind of intergenerational connection that corporate efficiency models could never quantify, but that formed the true foundation of educational success. Jennifer Adams joined me, following my gaze to where Emma was confidently leading a group game she had invented. "She's like a different child now," Jennifer remarked. "More confident, more engaged. The therapist says her anxiety symptoms have decreased significantly just in these 2 weeks." "Children respond to environments that honor their capabilities and needs," I replied. "When we create spaces where they feel genuinely seen and valued, their natural resilience emerges." Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when I first heard you had a special forces background, I couldn't reconcile it with the gentle teacher I knew. But watching all this," she gestured toward the festival, the laughing children, the engaged community, "I understand completely." "How so?" I asked, curious about her perception. "Your military training wasn't about combat. It was about protection," she said simply. "You're still doing exactly that, just with different tools." Her insight captured perfectly the connection I had finally embraced between my past and present work. In both contexts, the mission remained constant: creating security through relationship, building resilience through community, and protecting spaces where vulnerability could safely exist. As the festival continued around us, I watched Tyler confidently explaining his block structure to interested adults, Maya leading younger children in a collaborative art project, and Emma organizing a complex dramatic play scenario with friends. Each child demonstrated the confident engagement that comes from feeling secure in an environment built around their needs. This was the true measure of our success, not merely stopping corporate standardization, but affirming an educational approach that recognized children as complete human beings deserving of respect and responsive care. In preserving Sunshine Kids, we had protected something far more valuable than a child care center. We had defended the principle that education at its best is about human connection, not institutional efficiency. The soft daycare teacher with the special forces background had found her most important mission, not despite the seeming contradiction between these identities, but because of the profound connection between them. True protection had never been about force or control. It had always been about creating environments where vulnerable people could flourish. As evening approached and families gathered for a community potluck dinner, Eleanor joined me near the playground, where children continued their play in the golden light of sunset. "When you applied for this position 5 years ago," she said, "I knew there was more to your story than you were sharing. But I never imagined quite how perfectly your background would prepare you for saving Sunshine Kids." I smiled, watching Emma demonstrate a careful balancing technique to younger children, her movements confident and her expression serene. "Every mission prepares you for the next one, if you're paying attention to the right lessons." The center would face future challenges. Kid First remained the technical management company. Corporate pressures on early childhood education continued throughout the industry, and sustaining community engagement would require ongoing effort. But we had discovered our collective strength and established a model for resistance that others could follow. The soft daycare teacher's cover hadn't merely been perfect. It had revealed a deeper truth about protection, security, and community resilience than any military operation could accomplish alone. In the laughter of children freely playing, the engagement of parents actively shaping educational environments, and the professional confidence of educators reclaiming their expertise, I found the most meaningful victory of my career. Not a triumph of force over opposition, but the creation of something worth protecting. A community where children could grow into their full human potential, supported by adults who recognized that investment in their development was society's most crucial security mission. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.